So I have a book summary, against our better judgment, right? The hidden history of how the United States, was used to create Israel, by Alison Weir. Okay, what if everything, you thought you knew about the creation of Israel and America's role, in it here was only part of the story? What if, behind the political theater, right, there was a hidden campaign, of manipulation, propaganda, and betrayal? So Alison Weir's, against our better judgment, delivers meticulously researched and deeply, unsettling accounts of how the United States was, maneuvered, often against its own interests, into feliciting the creation of the state of Israel, with clarity, her convictions, and an eye for disturbing details, where lays where the powerful forces and obviously covered lobbying efforts that shaped American foreign policy and altered the course of Middle East history forever. So here the overview, that far from a dry historical narrative, against our better judgments reads like a geopolitical thriller, where an investigative journalist and founder of the If Americans Knew organization assembles a compelling case that the formation of Israel was not just straightforward response to post-Holocaust guilt, a purely humanitarian project, but rather a culmination of long-term Zionist planning, strategic manipulation of US policymakers, and aggressive lobbying efforts on both sides of the Atlantic. So drawing on vast array of primary sources, declassified documents, and the words of prominent political figures, right, where shows how the United States often unaware or deliberately misled, became a tool for executing what many Palestinians still call the Nakba, right, the displacement and the dispossession of an entire people. So here, the first point is the power of Zionist lobby, where traces the early, 20th century roots of Zionist lobbying, in the United States, highlighting how key individuals and organizations, worked relentlessly behind the scene to push U.S. recognition, of the state of Israel. These groups, were often far more influential, that the general public or even many government officials realized. Myth and reality, myth versus reality. So much like the creation myth here embraced by ancient tribes, the story of Israel's foundation here, according to Weir, is laced with strategic omissions and historical distortions, right? She compares the Zionist narrative to a form of modern chutpah, right, the audacity of stealing land, that then obviously claiming her victimhood, right, when the original inhabitants resist, right. So the third point is what here, the consequences of grand theft. We are detailed, the enduring cost of US supports for Israel, not only billions of taxpayer dollars and military aid, but also in global credibility, regional stability, and the lives of American soldiers. She emphasizes that the long arc of Middle Eastern turmoil, including wars in Iraq and tensions with Iran and Syria, right, can be traced back to decisions influenced by pro-Israel advisors embedded in US policy making circles, right. Historical vignettes and obviously first-hand accounts. The book gains additional weight through historical recollections like that of a former US senator recalling how the State Department struggled to justify Israel's status as America's staunchest ally. The irony depends, totally depends. The irony depends with reference to the 1969 Israeli attack on the USS, obviously Liberty, in which 34 American sailors, were killed by Israeli forces in what was officially, dismissed as a tragic error. An event that, still haunt many US veterans and obviously intelligence officers. Where also, unearths, right, the title, unearth the little discussed, case of Jonathan Pollard, right, an American intelligence analyst who sold classified information to Israel, which was then obviously traded to the Soviet Union, right. This Weir argues reveals the complex and at times, duplicitous, nature of the so-called US-Israel spiritual relationship. So why this book matters, in a book where political alliances are often framed, as a moral imperatives, right, against our better judgment, challenges the readers to re-examine assumptions about America's role in the Middle East, right. The book here suggests that blind support for Israel has not only cost the US economically and militarily, but also morally, by aligning itself with actions that contradict, right, international law and basic human rights. This book not a condemnation of Judaism, not a denial, not a denial of Jewish suffering. It is a dissection of how political Zionism, as a movement of orchestrated the creation of state through method that continue to reverberate in today's conflicts. For those seeking to understand the root of modern Middle Eastern geopolitics, this book is indispensable, right. So final thought is what, provocative, sovereign and deeply researched, right, against our better judgment, is essential reading for those who wish to move beyond headlines and obviously sound bites. Alison Weir has written a book is both scholarly and obviously accessible, one that dares to ask uncomfortable questions and present inconvenient truth. At its heart, this book is a call for accountability, transparency, and more honest public dialogue about U.S. foreign policy, right. So the first point is here that always question the official narrative. Governments and obviously media often present obviously polished one-sided story. This book teaches young people to ask deeper questions, seek multiple perspectives, and obviously examine who benefits from dominant narrative. So across the world, power structures often rewrite history, to fit national or political interest. So this book is a call to resist, passive acceptance and instead become, critical thinkers and informed global citizens. Second point is understand the power of lobbying and influence. Policy is not always made in the interest of people, it's often shaped by invisible hands, lobbyists, special interest groups, and obviously foreign influence. The youth must understand how decisions made in Washington or any capital are often the result of pressure, not principles, right. So the global impact is what here, that from climate change to war, global youth must realize how powerful lobbies, whether in defense, oil and pharmaceuticals or foreign government shape the future. Awareness is the first step toward reforms. Third point is what justice is obviously universal. It stands with the oppressed. This book highlights how one person's one people's national aspirations can come at the violent expenses of another. Young people must learn that justice cannot be selective. If we fight for Ukraine, we must also care about Palestine. If we support democracy, we must oppose occupations, right. Okay, a generation guided, by universal principles that rather than political convenience, can reshape international norms and create a more human world order. Point number 4 is what here, that know your history or be doomed to repeat it. Here many modern conflicts that like those in Iraq, Syria, Gaza and Iran can't be understood without knowing how past actions were manipulated. This book urges you to study history with an open mind, free of propaganda. Only by recognizing past injustices can be prevent future ones. When young people understand how history was engineered, they become stronger defenders of truth, peace and human dignity. Point number 5 is what independent thought is form a resistance. Being well informed reading critically and thinking independently is one of the most powerful tools in an age of mass misinformation. Alison Weir's book empowers readers to value truth over tribal loyalty and political pressure. And independent thinking, global youth can reject fake wars, racist manipulations, and demand truthful, leadership. That's how change begins, from the minds of next generation. So don't be silent. Speak up. Silence supports the status quo. When governments engage in unethical behaviors, it's the duty of informed citizens, especially the youth, to speak up, organize and resist. So movement like Black Lives Matter, obviously Friday for Future, global pro-Palestinian, activism proof that youth voices can shake the world. This book shows why moral courage is essential. So final takeaways, for the youth is, if we do not learn how our world was shaped, we will never be able to reshape it for the better. Against Our Better Judgment is more than a history book. It's a wake-up call, for this generation. It offers a roadmap to awareness, a challenge to myths, we have inherited, and a vision for more just and obviously truthful future. So yeah.